In the shadow of St. Agatha's Cathedral, Easter Sunday of 1977 dawned with the same reverence it had for centuries. The small town of Blackmere, nestled in the fog-laden valleys where time seemed to move differently than in the world beyond, prepared for its annual procession. The cathedral's stone walls, blackened by centuries of candle smoke and dampened by persistent mist, held secrets that the townspeople had long chosen to ignore. 5 acolytes entered the cathedral's crypt that morning to retrieve the ceremonial vessels. 5 young men, ages 16 to 19, chosen for their piety and dedication. By nightfall, none would be seen again. The disappearance of Thomas Webb, Michael Harrow, James Finch, Daniel Cooper, and Peter Ashton became a wound that never properly healed in Blackmere's collective memory. The investigation lasted 6 months, reads the yellowed newspaper clipping from the Blackmere Gazette. No bodies, no evidence of struggle, no witnesses. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed them whole. The case files were eventually sealed, tucked away in the county archives where uncomfortable truths are left to gather dust. What few know is that Bishop Malcolm Reed, who oversaw the cathedral at the time, kept a private archive. Journals, letters, and photographs that remained untouched until his death in 1991. Are you brave enough to learn what truly happened within those hallowed walls? What the townspeople whispered about behind closed doors? The truth isn't what the conspiracy theorists claimed. Not satanic ritual, not alien abduction. The reality was far more mundane and far more terrifying. It was entirely human. Blackmere exists in a perpetual state of autumn, a place where mist clings to ancient stone and forests surround the town like sentinels. The cathedral rises above it all, its spire piercing the low-hanging clouds. In 1977, the town maintained its isolation with stubborn pride, suspicious of outside influence. The steady toll of the cathedral bells marked the hours, days, and years with relentless precision. The sound of choir practice would drift through town on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, voices rising in devotional harmony. Locals spoke of how St. Agatha's had the finest boys' choir in the county, perhaps even the country. Bishop Reed had elevated the cathedral's reputation through rigorous discipline and unwavering standards. A voice raised in praise must come from a vessel of purity, he often said during his sermons. The 5 missing acolytes had all been choir members. Thomas, the eldest at 19, had a tenor voice that could bring parishioners to tears. Michael, 17, possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of hymns and liturgy. James and Daniel, both 16, were cousins who had served at the altar since they were 7. Peter, 18, was the newest addition, having moved to Blackmere just 2 years prior when his father took a position at the local hospital. In the weeks before Easter 1977, several parishioners noticed changes in the young men's behavior. Mrs. Eleanor Finch, James's mother, later told investigators that her son had become withdrawn, often staring vacantly during meals. He would flinch at the sound of the cathedral bells, she said. But when I asked what was troubling him, he would just smile and say he was tired from extra rehearsals. Thomas Webb's girlfriend, Sarah Mitchell, reported similar concerns. The last time I saw him was 3 days before Easter. He told me he'd been having nightmares about the cathedral crypt. Said he could hear singing coming from behind the walls. The police dismissed her statement as the dramatic imagination of a grieving young woman. The first person to notice something truly wrong was Martin Graves, the cathedral groundskeeper. A man of few words and fewer friends, Martin lived in a small cottage on the cathedral grounds. On Good Friday morning, he arrived early to tend to the gardens before the service. I saw a light in the bell tower at about 4 in the morning, he told police. Thought it was odd, since no one should have been up there at that hour. Then I heard what sounded like chanting. Not regular choir singing, something older. When I went to investigate, I found a candle burning at the tower door, but no one inside. Martin reported his findings to Father Lawrence, the junior priest serving under Bishop Reed. Father Lawrence assured him it was probably just some of the boys practicing for the Easter service and advised him not to disturb the bishop with such trivial matters. When Martin insisted something felt wrong, Father Lawrence became irritated and reminded him of his place. "I knew I should have pushed harder," Martin would later confess to his sister in a letter. "There was a smell in that tower, like copper and incense mixed together, and on the steps I found a small silver button I recognized from the Acolytes' ceremonial robes. But I was afraid of losing my position, my home. God forgive me for my silence." The final service the 5 Acolytes attended was the Good Friday evening liturgy. Several parishioners commented on how pale and exhausted the young men appeared. Mrs. Abernathy, a church organist for over 40 years, described them as hollow-eyed, like they'd seen something that had drained the very life from them. Bishop Reed, by contrast, was described as energized and almost feverish with excitement during the service. When Easter Sunday came, the 5 Acolytes reported to the cathedral at dawn, as was tradition. They were last seen by Sister Margaret, who supervised the altar preparations. They went down to the crypt together to bring up the special chalice and paten used only for Easter, she testified. Bishop Reed had gone down earlier to prepare the way, as he put it. The alarm wasn't raised until the beginning of the service, when Bishop Reed emerged alone, explaining that the boys had taken ill suddenly and returned home. It wasn't until evening, when frantic parents began calling one another, that the truth became clear. None of the young men had returned home. Carolyn Cooper, Daniel's mother, was the first to call the police. "My son would never miss Easter dinner," she insisted. "Something's happened to him, to all of them." By midnight, a search party had formed, combing the cathedral grounds with flashlights and growing dread. Officer Robert Jenkins was the first law enforcement official to enter the crypt that night. His initial report, later redacted from official records, described the scene. The ceremonial chamber appears normal, though unusually clean. The stone floor shows signs of recent washing. The ancient tunnel leading to the catacombs has been unsealed, the mortar around the stones still fresh. Bishop Reed claims no knowledge of this. What Officer Jenkins found in that tunnel, scratch marks on the walls, a torn piece of white ceremonial cloth, and a single shoe belonging to Thomas Webb, became the only physical evidence in a case that would consume the town for months to come. The tunnel itself extended nearly half a mile before ending at a cave-in that appeared recent. Despite efforts to excavate, no bodies were ever found. Bishop Reed maintained his story. The boys had complained of feeling unwell, and he had sent them home before the service. When confronted with the evidence from the tunnel, he suggested that perhaps the boys had decided to explore the catacombs and met with an accident. "A tragic misadventure," he called it, his voice steady, his hands folded calmly in his lap. For 6 months, the investigation continued without progress. The families held a memorial service in October, though some, like Thomas's father, refused to attend. "My son isn't dead," he maintained until his own passing in 1983. "He's being kept somewhere. That church took him." What no one knew then was that Thomas's father might have been right. 15 years passed, and Blackmere settled into a wounded normalcy. The cathedral remained, though attendance dwindled after the scandal. Bishop Reed was eventually transferred to a remote parish in Scotland in 1979, a move the diocese described as routine rotation. Father Lawrence was elevated to lead St. Agatha's, his sermons focusing on forgiveness and moving forward. The case of the missing acolytes became something people referenced in hushed tones, a local tragedy that evolved into legend. Then came the summer of 1992, when renovation work began on the cathedral's aging altar. Margaret Wilson, now in her 30s, had returned to her hometown to oversee the preservation efforts. As an architectural conservator specializing in religious structures, she approached the project with professional detachment, until the workers removed the marble facing of the altar wall. There was a small cavity that shouldn't have been there, Margaret later wrote in her report. Inside was a package wrapped in altar cloth and sealed with red wax. The package contained a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. The name inside the cover, Peter Ashton. News of the discovery spread through Blackmere like wildfire. The journal was quickly taken into police custody, but not before Margaret had photographed several pages. What those pages revealed would reopen wounds long thought healed and raise questions about what truly happened within St. Agatha's during Bishop Reed's tenure. The journal's first entry was dated January 15, 1977, 3 months before the disappearance. Today I was invited to join what Bishop Reed calls the Scholars' Circle, Peter had written. Thomas, Michael, James and Daniel are already members. The bishop says we have been chosen for our voices and our understanding of the true nature of devotion. We are to meet in the chapter house after regular choir practice. Thomas seems nervous about it, says it's a great honor. Subsequent entries described increasingly strange activities, late-night study sessions where the bishop lectured on obscure medieval texts, unusual breathing exercises designed to purify the vocal vessel, and a tea served at these meetings that left Peter feeling strangely disconnected, as if watching myself from a distance. By March, the entries became more disturbing. Michael collapsed during private rehearsal today. Bishop Reed said it was merely the physical response to spiritual elevation. When Michael came to, his voice had changed, deeper, richer. The bishop seemed pleased, said Michael had crossed the first threshold. Later, I found Michael in the bathroom crying. He showed me marks on his chest, small puncture wounds in a circular pattern. Said he doesn't remember how he got them. Detective Clara Winters, who had been a junior officer during the original investigation, was assigned to review the journal and the case. Reading those pages was like watching someone document their own brainwashing, she would later tell journalists. These boys were being systematically broken down through sleep deprivation, possible drugging, and psychological manipulation. The most revealing entry came from April 5, 1977, just 3 days before Good Friday. Bishop Reed showed us the crypt today. Not the main chamber we've always used, but a hidden room behind the north wall. He removed stones that looked ancient but came away easily. Inside was an older room with strange acoustics. When we sang there, the sound seemed to fold back on itself, creating harmonies we weren't actually singing. The bishop said it was built this way by the cathedral's founders who understood the science of divine sound. Thomas tried to leave halfway through. The bishop had Father Lawrence bring him back. I saw tears on Thomas's face. While authorities began a new investigation, focusing now on locating Bishop Malcolm Reed, a key witness emerged from years of silence. Sister Agnes, who had been a young nun at St. Agatha's in 1977, finally spoke about what she had witnessed. Her testimony had been absent from the original investigation. She had been sent to a convent in France immediately after Easter Sunday 1977. A transfer, she now revealed, came with explicit instructions never to discuss her time at Blackmere. I couldn't sleep that Good Friday night, she recounted, her hands trembling as she spoke. I went to the chapel to pray and heard voices from the crypt. I knew I shouldn't, but I followed the sound. Through the door, I saw Bishop Reed with the 5 boys. They were standing in a circle around something I couldn't quite see. Their robes had been modified with strange symbols sewn in red thread. They were singing, but not any hymn I recognized. The bishop was recording them on equipment I'd never seen in the cathedral before. Sister Agnes described hiding when she heard someone approaching. Father Lawrence carrying a tray with small cups. He gave each boy something to drink. Within minutes, they seemed to change. Their voices became deeper, almost adult, but with a quality that wasn't human. Thomas tried to stop, clutching his throat. The bishop struck him, said he was too close to achieving the perfect resonance to fail now. Frightened, Sister Agnes had fled back to her quarters. The next morning, when she attempted to speak to Father Lawrence about what she'd seen, he informed her of her immediate transfer. He told me I had been imagining things, that too much devotion could sometimes lead to spiritual hallucinations. But as I was leaving, he warned me, some knowledge isn't meant for everyone. Sometimes silence is the truest form of service. While Peter's journal and Sister Agnes's testimony painted a disturbing picture, they didn't explain what had happened to the 5 young men. That piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. Dr. Harold Ashton, Peter's father, who had moved away from Blackmere shortly after the disappearance. When contacted by Detective Winters, Dr. Ashton initially refused to speak about his son. After learning about the journal, however, he agreed to an interview at his home in Cornwall. What he revealed shocked even the hardened detective. Bishop Reed approached me in February 1977, Dr. Ashton confessed. He knew about my research at the hospital. Experimental treatments for vocal cord nodules using a combination of electrical stimulation and enzymatic compounds. He claimed to be interested in preserving the boys' voices through adolescence. I was flattered. A man of the church showing interest in science. He asked for samples of my compounds, and like a fool I provided them. Dr. Ashton had discovered too late what the bishop was doing. The compounds were never meant to be used the way he was administering them. Directly injected into the vocal cords, combined with other substances. When I confronted him after finding my son's notes hidden in his room, Reed told me I was contributing to something miraculous, the recreation of a sound that hadn't been heard since the 14th century. This miraculous sound became the focus of Detective Winters' investigation. Through Reed's abandoned papers, later found in the bishop's former residence, she discovered his obsession with what medieval texts called the angelic chord, a specific harmonic combination believed to open a channel of direct communication with the divine. According to Reed's notes, this chord required 5 perfectly trained voices, altered to produce tones beyond the normal human range. The journal's final entry, dated April 8, 1977, Easter Eve, revealed Peter's growing fear. Tomorrow we complete the work. Bishop Reed says once we achieve the perfect resonance in the crypt chamber, we will experience true transcendence. Thomas tried to run today. They brought him back. His eyes look different now, empty. The bishop has been injecting something into our throats daily. My voice doesn't sound like my own anymore. None of ours do. When we practiced today, the stones in the chamber vibrated. A crack appeared in the floor. I'm afraid, if anyone finds this... The entry ended mid-sentence. Whatever happened after that remained unknown, until Rachel Webb came forward. Rachel, Thomas Webb's younger sister, had been only 7 when her brother vanished. Now a grown woman, she revealed that she had received letters from Thomas over the years, 3 in total, with no return address, postmarked from different locations across Europe. The first came in 1980, she said, producing a worn envelope. I never told anyone, not even our parents. Thomas made me promise in the letter. He said if I told, they would find him again. The letter inside, written in what handwriting experts would later confirm was Thomas Webb's, contained the most chilling account yet of what had occurred on Easter Sunday 1977. We never left the cathedral that day, Thomas had written to his sister. What happened in the crypt changed us in ways I still don't understand. The bishop had been preparing us for months. The tea that made us compliant, the injections that altered our vocal cords, the ancient texts we were forced to memorize. But none of us knew the true purpose until that morning. Thomas described how Bishop Reed had led them into the hidden chamber, where a complex apparatus waited, part medical equipment, part recording device, with components that seemed oddly ancient. He told us we were the culmination of work that had spanned centuries, that certain frequencies, when produced by the human voice under specific conditions, could thin the veil between worlds. The 5 young men had been positioned at specific points in the chamber, each standing on a different symbol etched into the stone floor. The bishop administered final injections directly into their throats. a procedure Thomas described as burning like swallowing molten glass before beginning the ceremony. We sang as instructed, our voices no longer sounding human. The pain was excruciating, but we couldn't stop. It was as if something else had taken control of our vocal cords. The air in the chamber began to vibrate, and the walls seemed to become transparent. I saw things moving beyond them, shapes that hurt my eyes to look at. According to Thomas, a fissure appeared in the center of the chamber floor, widening as their singing continued. Bishop Reed was ecstatic, recording everything while shouting encouragement. "The gate is opening," he kept saying. But then something went wrong. The crack in the floor began emitting a sound, a counter-harmony to our voices. Father Lawrence started screaming that we needed to stop, that it isn't supposed to be this way. What happened next, Thomas wrote. He could only describe in fragments, as his memory of the event remained fractured. There was a burst of light from the fissure. I remember the sensation of falling. The bishop's face contorted in fear. Then darkness. When I regained consciousness, I was in a stone room I didn't recognize, with Daniel beside me. The others were gone. Thomas and Daniel had apparently been taken to a remote monastery in the French Alps, where they were kept isolated for months. The monks called us the Touched Ones. They spoke of Bishop Reed as a member of something called the Resonance Society, scholars obsessed with sound as a means of transcendence. They told us the bishop had gone too far, attempted something forbidden even within their order. The letter explained that Thomas had eventually escaped the monastery, but Daniel had chosen to stay, too broken by what had happened to face the world again. Thomas had been living under an assumed name, moving frequently, convinced that members of the Resonance Society were searching for him. "They believe we're still somehow connected to whatever came through that day," he wrote. "I hear it sometimes in my dreams, that counter-harmony from the fissure, and I wake up finding I've been singing in my sleep." Thomas's final letter to Rachel, received in 1985, contained a warning. "If anyone ever finds evidence of what happened, don't let them reopen the chamber. The cathedral was built where it stands for a reason. Some boundaries weren't meant to be crossed." Detective Winters, armed with this new evidence, obtained permission to examine the cathedral crypt. Behind the north wall, just as Peter's journal had described, they discovered the hidden chamber. The room remained exactly as it had been left 15 years earlier. Equipment still in place, strange symbols on the floor, and a jagged fissure running through the center of the stone floor, sealed with what experts would later identify as a cement mixture not commonly used in construction. "It was like walking into a frozen moment," Winters recalled. Dust covered everything, but you could still see where someone had packed up in a hurry. There were medical vials, recording equipment that technicians said was highly advanced for 1977, and papers covered in mathematical formulas relating to acoustic resonance. Most disturbing were the 5 chairs arranged in a pentagonal formation around the sealed fissure, each with restraints attached. Audio equipment specialist brought in to examine the recording devices made a remarkable discovery. The bishop had captured the entire Easter Sunday incident on specialized tape. After careful restoration, authorities listened to the recording, though few who heard it were willing to discuss its contents in detail. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, an acoustic physicist consulted on the case, was one of the few who spoke openly about the recording. "The voices on that tape aren't consistent with any known human vocal patterns," she stated in her report. "The harmonic structure defies conventional analysis." More concerning were the anomalous sounds that appear approximately 18 minutes into the recording, sounds that don't match any known acoustic source, and seem to originate from what participants on the tape refer to as the opening. The manhunt for Bishop Malcolm Reed intensified following these discoveries. Interpol bulletins were issued, and reports of sightings came from religious communities across Europe. In December 1992, authorities traced him to a small village in northern Italy, but arrived to find his rented cottage empty, with evidence suggesting he had fled just hours before. What they did find, however, was a room filled with research materials, books on medieval sound theory, anatomical diagrams of the human vocal apparatus, and maps marked with locations of ancient churches and cathedrals known for their unusual acoustic properties. Most significantly, they discovered correspondence between Reed and other members of what appeared to be a widespread network, the Resonance Society that Thomas had mentioned. One letter, dated just weeks before the police raid, contained a chilling passage. The Black Mirror experiment came closer than any previous attempt. With what we've learned from the recording and your notes, preparations for the Geneva location are proceeding. The new subjects show even greater potential, particularly the girl whose vocal range exceeds anything we've measured previously. This evidence suggested that Reed's work had not only continued, but expanded. Detective Winters coordinated with European authorities to investigate potential sites matching the criteria in Reed's documents. Several facilities were raided in the following months, but each was found abandoned, with signs of recent occupancy and hasty departure. Michael Harrow's fate was discovered through dental records matching remains found in a shallow grave near the French monastery Thomas had mentioned. James Finch was never located. In 1994, a man believed to be Peter Ashton was briefly detained in Berlin, but escaped custody during transfer, leaving behind only a written statement. What came through the gate follows us still. We carry it in our modified vocal cords, in our dreams. We can never stop running. As for Bishop Malcolm Reed, his ultimate fate remains unknown. The last confirmed sighting placed him in Istanbul in 1995, reportedly in the company of a group of robed figures escorting a young girl. An international bulletin remains active for his arrest, though many investigators believe he is likely deceased, given his advanced age. St. Agatha's Cathedral was deconsecrated in 1993. The crypt was sealed with concrete and steel under the supervision of multiple religious and governmental authorities. The building stands empty now, surrounded by chain-link fence and warning signs. Occasionally, locals report hearing singing from within its walls, particularly around Easter, voices that sound almost, but not quite, human. Rachel Webb, now the custodian of her brother's letters and the primary advocate for the victims, established a foundation dedicated to locating and helping survivors of experimental religious practices. What happened in Black Mirror wasn't isolated, she maintains. My brother's letters described other facilities, other victims. The Resonance Society didn't begin or end with Bishop Reed. The hidden chamber's contents were placed in secure storage at an undisclosed government facility. The recording captured that Easter Sunday has been classified, with access restricted to specific research personnel. Those who have studied it report consistent side effects, persistent earaches, auditory hallucinations, and in 3 documented cases, the spontaneous vibration of glass objects in their presence for weeks afterward. Dr. Montgomery, who spent 2 years analyzing the acoustic phenomena captured on the tape before abruptly abandoning her research, offered perhaps the most disturbing assessment. What Reed was attempting wasn't mystical in nature. It was based on principles of quantum acoustics and neural manipulation that science is only beginning to understand. He was using these boys as biological instruments, modifying them to produce sounds that could affect the physical properties of matter at a fundamental level. The most troubling aspect, she concluded in her final report before resigning her position, is that the recording suggests he partially succeeded. The frequency combinations achieved in that chamber created measurable distortions in the electromagnetic field. In layman's terms, they were literally altering the fabric of reality through sound. The case of the 5 missing acolytes remains officially open. The diary of Peter Ashton is preserved in evidence storage, its final pages a testament to youth corrupted by obsession disguised as faith. Blackmere itself has dwindled, many residents choosing to leave rather than live in the shadow of the empty cathedral. Perhaps the true horror of what happened lies not in the supernatural implications, but in the very human evil that orchestrated it, the willingness to sacrifice young lives in pursuit of forbidden knowledge. As Thomas Webb wrote in his final letter to his sister, "The bishop told us we were reaching for the divine, but all I saw through that opening was darkness. The real monster wasn't what might have come through. It was the man who opened the door." In the silence that has fallen over St. Agatha's, the question remains: are some boundaries in human knowledge meant to remain uncrossed? When science and faith both abandon their moral foundations, they become indistinguishable from the darkest forms of human ambition. The 5 acolytes of Blackmere paid the price for that ambition, and somewhere, perhaps, they are singing still.